Whenever we start working with a new entity, there is a big phase of euphoria. We have made a new deep connection. Maybe we have connected to a new deity, to our ancestors, to some new spiritual guide. And there is this unknown power surging through us and this feeling of being supported and loved. Now, it is usual that after that, we get into a phase where all of that euphoria is a bit numbed, where we feel like we have to integrate it into our daily routines rather than having this feeling of surging power all the time. And when this wears off and when new practices become old and when inspiration becomes routine, essentially, we often get stuck in our spirituality. We get this feeling that we don't know how to proceed, and that is exactly what I want to talk about in this video. Before I go into the specifics, I also want to recommend another video I did about inspiration in witchcraft and how to find it. That is a more general video, and in this video, I really want to teach you how to deepen a practice with one specific entity or multiple specific entities rather than a general witchcraft practice. So what this video is about is specifically to keep a practice going with deities, with guides, with ancestors, whatever you are working with. Now, to start off, I want to say that I'm just going to call them entities, so I don't have to say goddesses, gods, deities, guides, ancestors all the time. So whenever I say entities, you can replace it with whatever you are working with at the moment and where you want to deepen your practice if it has become a little bit stale as of right now. So the first thing that I would suggest is that you boil down your practice with this entity to a comprehensive and concise sentence or set of sentences. Why we are doing this is to get kind of a status quo so that you can help measure how far you've come already and have a basis to work on about where you want to go. So the first question you can ask yourself to kind of find that status quo, your current relationship with them, is to ask yourself, what meaning do they have in your life? What do they help you with right now? Another thing you could ask is, how do you connect with them? What do you actively do when you want to converse with them? Do you meditate? Do you draw cards? Do you just ask for their assistance and then go to sleep and have a good dream, have an insightful dream about it? So write down those things. How do you actively connect with them? And then, how do they take form and come into communication with you? Do they maybe, does it feel like they leave signs for you in the outer world whenever you go outside? Or do they directly speak to you in your dreams? You know, there are a lot of ways in which they can communicate with us, and setting down how they communicate with you is going to be helpful to hone in on your relationship. And then you can also write down, are there multiple entities that you're working with? Is it just one entity? Would you say that your practice with them is mostly dedication to them? Like, do you address them very often? Do you give them offerings? Or is it more of a practical relationship where they help you in your everyday life? Now, after you have that status quo, the second thing that you can do is expand on your practice by asking yourself the simple question of, where would you like to be more in contact with those entities? How would you like them to help you? Where do you want them to be present in your everyday life? And by figuring that out, you can really see what the possibilities are and find new answers to those questions from the first question. So, for example, you can find new ways to connect with them, new ways how they communicate with you. Maybe you want them to help you with your insecurities specifically, and you can make up an address to them to help you, to call them in whenever you feel insecure. Maybe you want them to be present whenever you garden, whenever you cook, and you make up a mantra or an address to them for that. or maybe you want to do more dream work with them so that you have kind of a routine of something you do before bed to call on them and to get those messages through to you. So know what you want and find out how you can get it, essentially. It's very much like a normal human relationship where you kind of have to know what your needs are, what you are expecting out of it, and then communicate that you want it and figure out how you can get that. As the third aspect for kind of helping you when you feel stuck in your practice, when you feel like you're not quite connecting to deities, is studying and inspiration. There are quite a few topics pertaining to this. And the first one I want to tackle is that you could, whenever you accept a new practice or learn about a new practice, try and relate that back to the entity that you work with. For example, if you learn about chakras, you learn about the solar plexus chakra, you relate that back to an entity that you work with, to an entity related to self-confidence, to shining bright, you know? Or if you learn a new tarot spread, you could tweak it and kind of make it about your ancestors, make it about someone you want to communicate with. And you can also, whenever you learn runes or spells, kind of see the relations to your entities, because that will deepen your connection. So if you are really focused on forging a deeper connection, do consider kind of asking yourself, whenever something new comes into your practice, ask yourself, how does this relate to the entity that I'm working with? How does this relate to the goddess I work with, the ancestor I'm working with, my spirit guides? And then you can find new touch points to kind of make old things feel new again as well, because you've kind of found a new way to engage with them. And then another thing I want to say with the subject of studying and inspiration is to get source material that maybe you wouldn't traditionally think of. You know, whenever we work with ancestors, we might do a course about ancestry work, we might read a book about ancestry work, but at the core of it, maybe what you need to do is to figure out what time period you want to work with, what ancestry you want to work with, and then just read a book from that period that maybe your ancestors could have read. Even if it's a historical book, you could also do that. Or if you work with dragons in your practice, you could find creative source materials. For example, read fantasy books about dragons, read Dungeons and Dragons guidebooks, and kind of bring in new energy and creative ways in which you can engage with them. Or for goddesses, for example, I really loved this about the book Persephone Rising. I will put a link to my review of that below. With Persephone Rising, she spent a lot of time talking about the Abandon trilogy, which is a young adult novel trilogy, as far as I understand. I haven't read it myself, but the story relates very closely to the story of Persephone. And, you know, finding books like that, searching for books that kind of indirectly pertain to the entity that you're working with can be very, very helpful and can deepen your practice in a way that is more creative than just reading books about witchcraft, about ancestry work, about spirit guide work. You know what I mean? All right, so the next thing I also want to say that is very, very important. I know that you want to deepen your connection with those entities, and there's probably a good reason for it. But the fourth thing I really want to say is to permit yourself to also do things unrelated to those entities. Because sometimes when we get so euphoric about making a connection, we kind of strive to keep it and hold on to it too tightly. But the thing with spirit guides, with goddesses, with any deity, with ancestors, is that usually they will not be ever present in your life for you to notice. So do remember to build up your own power, your own empowerment, your independence in your practice, so that you're not getting too dependent on them, if you know what I mean. So maybe find practices that don't necessarily relate to those entities, but that are just for you. And not that ancestor work isn't for you, but you know what I mean. Kind of foster your own independence. Find methods that aren't dependent on spirit communication or on communication with higher intelligences or entities like that. So I feel like that is very important as well. And yeah, let's make the comment section very interesting, very inspiring for everyone. Talk about how you connect with entities, maybe. Tell us what your favorite ways are, how you get messages from them, because I feel like there's so many different ways in which we can do this. And it's really amazing to read other people's stories about all of this. I'm also going to put a link to my Patreon and my Instagram down below. I appreciate it very much if you support me. And I wish you the greatest of days, the greatest of weeks, and I will see you soon.